my name is Luc Zipkin, and I'm 17 years old, and I'm a pilot involved with this C-47 Placid Lassie with the Tunison Foundation. I think I was very fortunate in that one of the very first things that got me involved in aviation was my family's in the aviation business. We've always kind of hung around old airplanes like this, and you spend enough time around something like this, and it's kind of hard not to get fascinated and interested by it. There's so much history and so much, mechanical, mechanically these airplanes are so fascinating. It's hard not to get completely engrossed in all this stuff.
What's your first memory as a young child related to airplanes?
I think probably my first memory was vomiting in the back of a Beech 18. And at that moment, I think I remember thinking that I was never gonna be a pilot or be able to be a part of any of this if I was just puking in the back of an airplane I was riding in. But here we are probably 10-12 years later, and thankfully I'm doing a little better than that as far as being around airplanes goes.
So Luc, your dad is a professional aviation businessman, runs a successful company, and also flies Placid Lassie, the C-47 where we're in. I'm sure he had a big impact in your, passion for aviation.
Well, absolutely. I think my dad was one of the biggest impacts on my, passion for aviation and interest in it, and certainly, in my ability to be around these airplanes and take part in the warbirds and the vintage airplanes. I think probably one of the ways I was most fortunate to work with him and benefit from that was my dad taught me to fly, and I know lots of people who have parents who are pilots and flight instructors and all that who they can't really work with their parents on that kind of thing. It just doesn't work out that way, but I feel very fortunate to have been able to share that with my dad and to have a relationship with him where there's a little bit of criticism needed in learning how to fly, and very happy with how that turned out.
Look, last year, age 16, you decided to do a cross country in a Piper Cub by yourself. Tell us how the idea came about.
Well, the idea for a coast-to-coast solo flight in the Piper Cub came about, as anyone who's kind of familiar with some of these books goes, after reading, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, a book called Flight of Passage by Rinker Buck. And back in the 60s, Mr. Buck and his brother, they flew across the country and back in a Piper Cub that they restored, and that story just hung with me. And so I always thought, especially if I could do it, as early as I could, that was always a story I was fascinated with. So when I was 16, I got my student pilot's license and got soloed in the Cub and started working on a way to do the entire flight on solo endorsements.
That's really fascinating. Tell us about the planning, what went behind, and share some of the experiences you had across the cross country.
Yeah, so I spent about 6 months planning the whole thing. There were some logistical challenges. I ended up doing it kind of in partnership with my dad. My dad followed me along in our Cessna 180. It ended up being a really cool experience for us to share. And so mainly because I couldn't check into a hotel on my own, which presented some complications for sure. But there was all kinds of really neat experiences, associated with that trip. You might drive across the country on the interstate, but you're going to see a lot of interstate and not so much of the country. And getting to go low and slow across the United States was just and meeting all kinds of interesting people with all sorts of different backgrounds was really exciting. And there are certainly faster ways to do it. I made 25 stops. It took me about 38 hours in the air across 6 days, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat, and I think everyone should get to experience that.
Anything specifically you remember the most? Any experience, any person you met?
Yeah, I think probably the experience that stuck with me the most. I don't know if it counts as a positive experience, but it was something that I remembered. Actually, there are two. Neither of them were particularly positive, but you sit back and think about them after and laugh about them. First was I made a stop in Sweetwater, Texas, and I got a ride to the hotel from the FBO manager, and I asked this sort of cranky old FBO manager, what brings people to Sweetwater, Texas? I'd never been to Sweetwater, Texas before, and he goes completely deadpan, funerals. That's the only thing that people go to Sweetwater, Texas for, and he as someone who lived there, he wasn't such a big fan of his town, but it was a really funny moment. And I guess one of the moments was I was in a cab going from the motel in Las Cruces to the airport there, and got delayed about 2 hours that morning changing a tire for the cab driver. And it's just stuff that happens on stuff like that, that it doesn't always go according to plan.
You are in the air, flying one of your legs. Anything that you remember particularly, or the flying portion, or anything related to one of your legs?
Yeah, I think as anyone who's done it knows, it's a long, slow ride, so you get plenty of time to yourself to think about what you're doing and all that. So it's pretty tough to let the airplane get ahead of you, but it allows you lots of time to think about the lag and take everything into consideration, which I really appreciated. There were a couple times where I was flying across Kentucky with low ceilings and kind of getting pressed up against the terrain, and I don't particularly care to do that again, but it certainly stuck with me, and there's certainly some lessons learned there.
What are your future plans, Luc?
Well, in the short term, in the fall, I'm headed to college. I'm studying economics and government, so not airplanes, but trying not to make that everything in my life. That it wouldn't get boring, but it would be only one thing. And in the meantime, working on my instrument rating and my commercial, and then trying to fly as much as I can and fly as many exciting airplanes as I